In this video, we're going to talk about the PowerShell Universal PowerShell module, as well as the management API that's integrated into PowerShell Universal. So first of all, a little bit about the management API. So the management API is actually what the admin console is using to configure PowerShell Universal. So anytime you log in or create anything in here, such as scripts or run scripts to create jobs, set schedules, it's all calling that through a REST interface that the admin console is using. You can call that directly. So if you actually go to security tokens and click this API documentation button, you'll actually see the entire management API. So you have APIs for my custom APIs. I'll show that in a second. Access controls, app tokens, authentication, the cache, components, computers, configuration, dashboards, etc., etc. So pretty much every API endpoint is available in this documentation. And what's cool about that is you can actually go back to this tokens page. I've actually generated an application token already. If you don't have one, you can click Add New App Token, select your identity, select your role, and select when the app token expires, and that will generate this app token. So if I actually copy that app token and I come over to my Swagger API here, I can click Authorize, paste the app token into this text box here, click Authorize, and now I can actually use the management API directly from the Swagger documentation. So for example, if I wanted to list all app tokens, I would do this get API v1 app token get all app tokens, and then I can click try it out. That's going to provide me with this execute button, and once I click that, it's actually going to execute the API directly using the app token that I provided. And you can actually see what it was, what it returned from the server. So here's my token, my identity, whether or not it's revoked, that kind of thing. So you can do that for any one of these API methods down here. But what's also cool about that is you can use the API from external PowerShell processes. So if I wanted to call the same the same request URL here, I could copy that URL. Instead of typing it, I'll put that in there. And what you would do is you would need to pass in your app token, because all this requires authentication. So headers, we are going to put in the authorization header. And then to put in an app token, you would put in bearer, and we'd have to copy our app token and just paste that into that bearer value and execute that. And you can see it works the same way via invoke REST method. So you could also call this from like curl or wget from Linux or something like that. So it's just a standard HTTP call to the management API. So if you do have other types of authentication, this will work as well. You don't have to use tokens for this. If you have Windows authentication, you can also use default credentials. So instead of specifying all the headers here, you would just say use default credentials, and it would call using your Windows single sign-on credentials. But it gets even easier if you want to use the PowerShell module for Universal. So I actually have it imported right now. You can see I have the Universal PowerShell module loaded up, and what's cool about that is it offers a bunch of commandlets around our REST API. So if you were to do something like get PSU script, and we have a bunch of like filtering controls and stuff like that, but what's required, at least if you're not connected, which I'll show you how to do in a second, is the computer name. So you need the URL of what you're connecting to, and then the app token. So we'll just copy that app token again and put that into my app token, which I will make sure is a string. And you can see that now that returns all the scripts that I have inside PowerShell Universal. So we have a bunch of different commands in there. So we did get command module, and you did universal. You'll see that there's tons of commands for doing all kinds of things inside PowerShell Universal around kind of automating your automation platform. If you want, you can also use connect PSU server, and if you set the computer name to the URL again, and the app token to the app token again. Now all your PowerShell Universal Commandlets are like connected to the PowerShell server. So if you just do get PSU script again, you can see I'm not specifying the computer name or the app token, and it still works because now it's connected to this particular PowerShell Universal instance. So you can use that, outside of PowerShell Universal or inside PowerShell Universal if you want to, and it's executing everything under the context of that particular app token user. The other way to integrate with PowerShell Universal is via inside PowerShell Universal, because PowerShell Universal obviously is a very scriptable environment. So what I've set up here is I have a single script called script.ps1, and if we look at the details of that, I'm selecting, or I am specifying a min and max parameter for this script, and I can call get random, pass the min and max, and it's going to return me a random value from within this script. So if I click run, I have min like 100, and it returned 52. So what most people want to do is execute their scripts from things like dashboards. So I've created a user interface, and I want to execute my script using one of the PowerShell Universal Commandlets. So we actually have invoke PSU script, and I could actually set that to script.ps1, and min is 1 and max is 100. And you can see it actually starts a job. And if we wanted to get the output of that, we could either return the output via the get pipeline output commandlet, or we could say wait. And what it's actually going to do is wait for that job to finish, and you can see it returned 72 directly to my console. So that's kind of cool because we actually get the pipeline output from that script that ran in PowerShell Universal. And what you can do inside PowerShell Universal is actually take advantage of a feature called what we call integrated mode for the commandlets. So if you actually go to this details, I've created a REST API that just returns a random value, and rather than re-implementing that get random call again, I'm actually using invoke PSU script in here. And you can see that I'm calling the script.ps1 just like I did on the command line. And I'm passing in the min and max value. I'm using integrated mode, and then I'm putting wait in there. So what integrated mode does is rather than calling through the actual management API, through the HTTP listener and using app tokens and all that kind of thing, it actually uses the internal communication channel within PowerShell Universal to call this commandlet. So that makes it a lot easier because you don't have to worry about app tokens, you don't have to worry about your URLs, which can get kind of complicated, especially when you're using reverse proxies like IIS. So in this case, it's just using that internal communication channel. There's no need to like configure any of that. So if I were to actually come back here and do, actually, instead of typing that, I'll just copy that from here. So instead of calling invoke PSU script from here, I can call invoke REST method, which will then invoke my script and return a random value. So that runs, and you can see that 56 was returned as my random value. And what's cool about that is, unlike an API where it doesn't really like audit very well, you can actually go to jobs, and we can see that this script was just run a few seconds ago. If I click 32, you'll see that 56 was what was returned, and that's also what has been returned via my invoke REST method. So the PowerShell Universal module pretty much wraps all the features of the PowerShell Universal Management API and allows you to kind of automate your automation environment. So in this video, we looked at the PowerShell Universal commandlet and the management API for PowerShell Universal.